can have the top, please.
And Bill, any basic consensus that we have on these recommendations at this moment in time is not to include at some point in the future, as we're looking at another policy area, saying, hey, guess what? Let's circle back on this particular item in policy area 2 because there's an inconsistency and maybe we need to tweak that somewhat, correct?
Yes,
Correct.
I think the chair said whatever the motion is, to consider these draft recommendations, a set of draft recommendations that we would hope you approve tonight, recognizing that you may, over the next several months, you may come back. And we know you're going to come back.
Can I make one clarifying point, because Jason brought it up to me earlier, and I need to know whether this is an okay practice or not, because there were some cases where your the comments from two different policy areas were, I thought, satisfied by the same recommendation to the planning board. So the question to you is, as you look at these, if you see a mix of policy numbers, the question is, does that recommendation address all of those policies? And now we're starting to get into just the ordinance page by page, and the policies are mixed. Is that, if you read it, you would have noticed that some of the policy areas are mixed into the comment.
See, and I guess that's where I feel it's okay for those to be mixed, because, again, we're in the video draft.
This is how we're moving toward that.
Yeah.
Because from what you've seen and read, from the work that you did, completed last week, does anybody have any additions or changes that you'd like to? I saw Ryan and Deborah will come back.
And it's not too bad. So when you hand these into zoning, they're gonna see the comments plus your breakdown, right? So they're gonna be able to see it all.
Plus,
Okay, so that,
the whole committee's recommendation.
awesome. So that answers some of that. So at the very end of 1.1, and I saw this a lot for a lot of people's comments, and real quick, so are we going off of the definitions of adequate, allow, everything that was in the comp plan as far as how the UDO should be read when it comes to should and shall and
One of the recommendations was to go through the entire UDO to make sure those words were lined up.
Okay, well, so if we're going off those definitions though that were in the comp plan, and I see what you're saying, but I think a lot of people said, it said may, but it should say should, but really may and should in the comp plan are kind of the same thing. And so in that bit, if we go down to the very bottom of that, where your recommendation has should and shall should be used over preferred, which is not strong enough. I think it should just be shall should be used.
Where am I?
So just keep scrolling down. There you go, right there.
Right there.
Yeah. So instead of should or shall, just say shall.
So are
Should
you
be.
suggesting that as putting that on the table for discussion?
Yeah, because should and shall are, it says or, and so that kind of implies that they're interchangeable when by definition they're not. Shall,
An example is the word should versus shall. That's what I meant by that.
okay.
Does that make it any difference?
You said you want shall.
Yeah, not should.
Instead of should.
Yeah, because should in here says preferred or recommended,
Right.
but not mandatory in all cases.
I think Carrie was trying to point out that we should make, we need to make sure where we're using should and shall, because they do mean different things. I think is what she's saying there, that review the entire thing, not to use should or shall specifically, but that they mean what they're supposed to mean based on the
Well, an example is the word is.
because you're right, because
As
should
long
and
as
shall are
that
not the
zoning is
same thing.
understanding, that's cool,
And
but it
does
shall be,
language.
So
shall.
let's.
But I
rewrite
think where we
it.
had
Let's
this
shrink.
initial discussion, we said it wasn't strong enough. It said preferred, even though preferred aligned with should, and we wanted it to be shall.
It said stronger and they could ask for a
But
variance.
isn't shall and must
Yeah.
interpret the same way?
Yes, but it was only should or preferred.
Does that make
We
any
were being
motion?
stronger
Make a
than the
motion,
comp.
get rid of something.
Well, yeah,
Well, yeah, we said shall and then they can ask for a variance.
Is there either
I'm not
a
sure.
motion or you're moving to
Yeah,
have?
I think we decided to skip motioning on each thing and just we'll put it in there and.
But the sense of the committee, I'm not seeing any debate or any objection. Yes, sir.
I had a question. Are we saying that we want everything that says should to say shall for everything?
No, is that section right there?
Does anyone have a better way of writing this that might be, that seems to understand?
It had to do with the building materials, as I recall, and it said preferred.
One then, is that the only
Yeah,
one?
it's just that one right
Just
there.
that one.
And it had to do with building materials and architecture, should
Oh, okay.
employ preferred building materials or
Right,
something.
right.
And we said it shall have, and then there was a list of a few of them.
Okay.
Preferred is not strong enough for building materials.
It should be.
I think there's a lot of the examples of that though kind of spread out in different policies as well.
And that one should be,
So it's kind of a general overarching.
what do you want to replace preferred with?
Shall.
I think it was just that one.
I've seen it in a bunch of different sections where I
And
thought.
when you say keyword consistency here, I'm testing this. It's consistency between the comprehensive plan and where it says shall on specific features, you're recommending that by being consistent, the UDO should also read shall.
I'm not necessarily saying that, because there's some definitions and the UDO is just so much more specific. And you can't just say because in lighting it said it's encouraged in one area that all aspects of lighting should be, encouraged and suggested and preferred. I mean, you really need to say that this is what we want to do. It's gonna help all sides. It's gonna help the town, it's gonna help the one who wants to build something in town to know what's expected. And then to know the process of trying to explain yourself or why you may not be able to do something. But if it's all preferred and it's all, well, no, we really prefer that, it's gonna just get into lawsuits, basically. People are gonna say, really? Well, then I'm gonna sue you over what you say should means and what I read it to mean.
Let me give a cut at this, because in the 1.1, it says, should employ brick, stone, wood, or like and similar building materials consistent with the detailing of Summerfield's early commercial properties as exemplified by the town hall and the Britton House. We were saying, in here it says preferred building materials. We think we should probably list these and should be or shall be these. We're going a little stronger than the comprehensive plan. And I think we can recommend that. I'm showing in alignment, but when we take into effect all these other factors, rural character, all of those other things that we talk about, I think it's okay for us to go more detailed within the UDO. That's how I read that at least. And I know should has preferred and that matches, but I don't think that matches where we are interpreting the comprehensive plan as a whole.
So how should I write that? This,
The word does, I think, doesn't need to be.
okay. The
An
language.
example is when the language,
When does the language call for should, and when does the language call for should? And actually, let me put this at the end of the comment, because this doesn't refer just to that policy. That is a, by the way, if we're gonna do this for policy one, we should go through the whole,
I see nodding heads. In general, that use of the
When
word
does the
should,
language-
shall, should apply to all these recommendations.
when is,
Shall.
when is should
In
appropriate?
this section, in this bus. Okay, any other comments? Deborah, you have,
So one area that I know we were all trying to figure out to put some specific language around was village like, what was that, how did it, and I did send a picture to Terry about something I had seen that I thought maybe, smaller signs, kind of, that I thought we might, maybe you'll hate it, maybe you won't, I don't know. But I thought if we could come up with words that were more specific, so it created what you're talking about, having a vision, a clear understanding, because I think, Amber, you were trying to say, well, I like this better, but I don't know, maybe more like this, but so we never really defined it. And I feel like it's screaming for some kind of definition or guidance or a little bit, something stronger. So I don't know, Carrie, you've got that picture, but,
It's, Bill, is it, do you,
Um,
or Carrie,
Can you first get to the language that there was, I think it's the policy 1.5 about village-like character. Let's see what the language before the committee is.
No, it's 1.3.
There's village-like
1.3.
function, is that what I'm?
yes. I believe this would be the recommendation that would address.
So Deborah, looking at that language that came out at the last meeting, are there changes that you would suggest to them?
I think it's just, it's creating those standards, and maybe, and I don't know if there's enough there that the zoning board will be able to create some unification with what's there. Maybe when I was looking at comments, to me, it just didn't seem defined, but there wasn't enough of a version.
So I think Deborah suggested that we include a representative photo with the comment.
There's adding graphics, and I'm not going to wordsmith the word graphics. Graphics can be diagram, can be
No, I think that.
visual
I think
representation.
that's so broad that it said, again, while you want flexibility, if we're trying to create village-like clusters like the comp plan, I think it needs to have some standards around what does that actually look like. We can do something that faces the road because we want commercial to face the road so people know what's there, but you can do things that, like the one picture that I sent, all the signs are smaller on buildings. So I guess that's what I was trying to do, is create some kind of representative. So I know you want me to do words.
Well, yeah, like it or not, in the eventual UDO, it's going to have words,
Right.
and if the committee is recommending diagrams are in a lot of ordinances.
Yeah.
Photos get, it's,
So maybe but we have to know what the diagram is going to look like.
But yeah, you say performance measures, list of elements, include references to applicable development standards. What's missing?
To me, just a definition of what that actually looks like. So if you were to read our comments, it's, there are comments where we're talking about Hillsdale Village, but maybe not Hillsdale Village, but through Lion, they face each other, and, so there's no real definition as to what do we want that other people talked about.
But this language goes to zoning board and staff to then develop into draft UDO, which then goes through various steps, I should think, that that's the point at which
They'll come up
it
with,
gets fleshed out.
yeah, that's what
And since this is going to the zoning board, this will be fine to get to them anyway, right? So that helps with the draft of the words.
you're in this, if I understand what Carrie has said, Dick, I think you probably know the reality. This body of recommendations will then go, the zoning board will then look at the more detailed version of this draft UDO that picks up on a lot of your recommendations along. And then there will be a draft before the board.
I frankly, I don't know how we're going to consider what we're making recommendations for today. We haven't talked about it, and a lot of people are putting a tremendous amount of time in reviewing this, and I don't personally think the zoning board is gonna sit and rewrite these ordinances themselves. I think we're gonna rely on the staff to do, based on your recommendations.
So do you think there's enough information there for you to come up with guidelines? That's, I guess, the question ultimately.
Probably, yeah. I mean,
We can go further.
Right.
Yeah.
One danger in pictures is that what if something doesn't look like that picture, then is it precluded from
yeah.
Right.
consideration?
No, I was really only thinking of the picture for the staff and the zoning, not to go
Yeah, for
for anything,
elements.
just for them, because they're gonna be doing the words, so that they will understand what we're trying to say, because they have to put it into the words. That was all. I wasn't saying for it to go into the words.
I think we won't get to it this evening, but I put a suggestion out that if anybody did have photos that would help the committee visualize and talk about community character, then to send them in. And I think given the pace of tonight's meeting, I think the opportunity is still there between now and November 2 to send some photos in of, here's what I really think, village-like character and why it is why it protects community character, or preserves it.
And that's what I was, it's just not necessarily, it needs to look like this, but elements that could be transferred into the definition so that whoever does it has more of a vision of what we like or recommend. It's not, that's all I was thinking.
Any other of these recommendations that you made last time that you'd like to hold up and, or suggest changes? Or further discussion?
Just in this section, or?
Yeah, just in one.
Yeah,
Just in
just in one
policy
here?
301.
Yeah, how about 1.2? Is there a lighting plan that's required? Is that just written somewhere? Because if you have that, then
Or
that ain't.
commercial.
Only for commercial? Then include it for residential. If someone's gonna include lighting, then they shall include a lighting plan. Because it's
But we're
already,
only focused on,
But we're going
we were
to-
focused on commercial, policy one, which is, so I think you jumped
so
ahead
we're gonna come back to that.
You'll get,
Okay. Then I'll just say
Great
that.
suggestion, I think,
Or
yes,
size.
absolutely, I
Okay, so,
support it, I second it, but.
so for commercial, you already have it in there.
Okay.
Great.
We will talk about it.
And the other one was for 1.6. Keep on going. Yeah, 1.6, your recommendation had the update dimensional standards, access and egress requirements, and signal access to comply with current NCDOT requirements. I'd like to remove that to comply with current NCDOT requirements, because I'm not really sure they really have any requirements for any of that.
Okay,
Yeah,
They do.
they do, for, you sure about that?
Well, I know that they have requirements on egress and access.
Yeah, for driveway stuff, they definitely do, but for stuff like backing to and from right-of-way, parking dimensions, stuff like that, I don't
Okay.
think they do. So,
I think that was just a note to self
right.
to make sure that we're not usurping NCDOT.
well, state
Requirement
guidelines
that
will
do-
always go over anything we say anyway. But if we say it and they don't say it, then what we say goes. And
That's
so, let's say
I
that.
see your point,
this
good to
stuff here.
remove it, because it could
So
lead
just-
one to believe that we're only going, that we're not asking for anything beyond that.
Right.
Do you have enough guidance from there?
Would the word consistent be better than to comply with?
It's really a given that there are some areas that will have to comply, such as minimum driveway widths, but we can make a larger minimum driveway width.
Right.
I mean, and so I think that's, you know,
And then we can say that's what we want here, and then if the developer wanted to say, well, the state only requires this, then we would have to say, well,
it's
all right, well,
clear
then you can
in the
do that.
ordinance.
But we can still ask for more. And so, but if the state doesn't ask for anything, then we can say what we want, and that's what it'll be. And I don't think the state says anything for a lot of these things, so
Gotcha.
let's not defer to the state when I don't think it's even there.
Just at a minimum, we'll
Other-
incorporate it.
Other policy recommendations for this policy area that you would like to either question or add language or subtract language? Can we go further down then? This is small-scale businesses within walking distance.
We jumped around, I don't want to.
Are there others?
Well, remember, we have seen all these,
Yes, you.
and we've had them for a week,
I was just giving members an opportunity if they thought of something between last meeting and this meeting that they wanted to bring up for further discussion. Are you ready then to move back to the last recommendation, that you look again at the language concerning the PD district?
Well, I'd like to, with the recognition that we're gonna be beating our heads against that collectively for the next several months,
Oh, yeah.
if we can just, I'd like to make a motion to accept these recommendations as a draft recommendation. And we'll go.
Well, I've got some questions in here, so I want to make sure that this, even if it's a draft, that the wording is, I mean, I had considered taking out the words planned area development and just make it a district.
Whatever they had, whatever they received after last meeting is what's before them.
That's right, and the
Well-
question, except the question, I added some question marks in there. And I added,
So-
keep a running list.
So the question is,
Carrie, I don't think anybody suggested to change the name of the district. It was
Okay.
that kind of, that sounds like that's the wrong thing to do. I think we just leave it that it's the PD and that we want more specificity, and we've got these down on here. And we'll have another shot at it when the process is over to wordsmith it if we want
we're
to.
gonna have another shot at it.
We're gonna have every area.
We have a motion to accept.
Well, wait,
These-
do you want me to take out, keep a running list?
Yeah,
No,
You like that?
yeah.
I
Because
think
that is added.
you've heard a sense of the committee, and that whether it's in the formal recommendation or not, you're gonna keep a running list.
Absolutely. And I've
And
already
I will
started
add,
today.
So can I be clear on what the motion is?
we have
And
a
I want
motion, we have a
everyone in
second.
this room to hear what the motion is. The motion is to move forward from these draft substantive issues for policy area 1 and go into policy area 2, knowing full well we'll continue to revisit some of the bigger issues, and we will revisit all of these at the end of this exercise once we get through 12 policy areas and maybe some other areas of the UDO. We are not motioning to approve a PD
well,
explicitly.
all right, so, since I'm taking notes, and
Strong
I've already got notes that Jason made a motion.
That's correct.
Do you want to restate your motion, and I'll do my best to write it down?
Sure, the motion is to approve these recommendations as a draft recommendation to zoning.
For this policy.
Do we have a second?
Policy.
Now, I already got Millie, and she's already seconded.
Is all in favor?
but are we approving it to zoning at this point?
No.
No, no.
Is that what you just said?
It's our draft recommendations.
Right,
revisit.
but is that what you just said? So it's, all we're doing is saying, we want to approve these to move to policy 2, we're coming back to this one. We're not approving it, we're not sending it to anybody, right?
They're coming back to all of
I'm
it.
I'm just trying to be clear, because it's not going to zoning at this point, it's just for us to move to policy 2.
Yes.
Okay, I'll amend.
Is that all we're doing?
So the
Yes.
motion,
Okay.
the motion is to tentatively approve these draft recommendations and move to policy 2.
I'll second.
Is that okay?
All in favor?
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Thank you.
Are you ready to move on to policy area 2?
And that took us, what, 6 weeks? 8 weeks?
Seven.
slow down?
Practically, I think we have.
Oh, hold on, can I go back to one thing? We already approved the minutes?
Yeah, yes.
Just making sure. Because I figured Bob was getting up to tell me, or
Gary, I have
Gary was
Gary
getting
and
up to tell
Jason
me that we
seconded.
need to
I got this down.
I think Bob should be our
We have
secretary.
policy area two as well.
Bob, you're doing
Yes,
awesome.
Does Deborah know she's taking the next one?
Yeah, your name
Yeah, you were picked first.
Deborah, you missed it by.
Yeah, your name was drawn first. Just how we got here, I think everybody knows this, but to take 20 seconds, you all sent in recommendations, or you all sent in comments based on your homework 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
30 minutes.
These were gathered, Carrie grouped them where there were similar comments, and then drafted a very draft recommendation that seemed to capture the sense of your comments. And so we're now beginning looking at the draft proposed recommendations in the green area relating to that policy area. And this, we don't have it on the screen, but this must be policy area 2.1.
Yes, well, and there were actually, in this policy area, I felt that there were a lot of policies that could be addressed by the same comment. So the question is, does this comment appropriately address all these, recommendation appropriately address all these comments?
And the recommendation reads, wherever sidewalks are included in the UDO, include opportunities to encourage or require, as appropriate, all transportation modalities.
Can we take out the encourage and say to require as appropriate?
Or you can do it, it's your words, so
I agree with that.
I'm giving them, offering them to you, but you change them.
Gary, can you explain to us what the requirements currently are in our ordinance for sidewalks, trails, and bikeways?
I believe the only ordinance, the only district that requires sidewalks is OSRD, and it requires sidewalks on at least one side of neighborhoods in OSRD. And I think it's a 5-foot sidewalk. It also offers,
Summerfield Road, I know Summerfield Road sidewalks, but I didn't know we required them in
in OSRD, they're supposed to be part of the Unified Development Plan.
So this is, the key words here, if I read them correctly, are all transportation modalities, not just, sorry,
Non-vehicular?
well,
What it means, non-vehicular.
I'm not on the committee, so I can't
Does that
express my
make me
discomfort.
clarify? That, does that mean?
That way when someone creates a new one, it will be covered.
Excuse me.
Yes, I'm serious, actually I'm serious, yeah, hoverboards or other things that are or aren't appropriate.
Any, shall we move on to the next? Scroll up to get the words to the.
Well, I wasn't sure if that was,
I'm just wondering, because I'm looking at how you lump them together, so I'm trying to, so 2.3 is together with 2.7, and I'm just, so what I'm trying to make sure is, like, anything that say in the neighborhood, I mean, everywhere in the comp plan, even in the UDO, talks about with such strong language that sidewalks or bike trails or biking lanes should be a part of new development. So is that conveyed enough in that, what you've written in green? Because I mean, if we don't start somewhere, we're never gonna get started. So any new neighborhood, I mean, comp plan says should or shall. So it's priority, or should, it's critical. Are we conveying that?
Are you talking about that suggestion?
I didn't hear that
Require.
suggestion. Oh, yes, I do like that suggestion, so require.
I went ahead and took out,
She took out the word encourage, but require.
So when it's,
and I'm saying include opportunities because it's not always practical.
yeah, but then you know better, so that's.
Well, I mean, not, a
But I
designer
think
will
that
know.
it should be, like that's saying it's a requirement or it should be a priority, but where it's applicable, it should be required.
Yes.
So therefore, the word, when we put in as appropriate. we put
As appropriate still-
So therefore, that would help if it's not practical for it to go in there.
Is that right?
Is that right? Is that my interpretation?
So we always want bikes everywhere
Right.
when it's appropriate.
Right.
And sidewalks with, where it's pictured. Because if we're gonna create connectivity.
Yeah, and that's one thing that struck me about it, Carrie, is that policy 2.1 is saying bike ped trails should be provided on a priority basis to connect residential and non-residential schools, parks, libraries, shopping centers. So does this say enough about connections, or is it only where sidewalks are prescribed? You know what I mean?
So,
I think the next one, come down one here. It says
Strengthen language to provide opportunities for trails, greenways, paths in open
so
space.
this was just about open space.
Dick knows.
Let's see if we got connectivity anywhere else. No, so, what's a good way to say that? Maybe we could
To
even.
require connectivity for all non-residential.
This is one
I'm still
thing,
saying opportunities.
this is one thing too, is to remember as the area grows, as we start to create those bike lanes, that also eases traffic. We worry about our resources, it helps shrink our carbon footprint. So that's another reason why, to me, it needs to be a priority to do what the comp plan's saying as well. It kind of plans for the growth and allows vehicular connectivity in other ways.
I agree with you, but are we still just gonna say that where it's appropriate?
Well, that's, I mean, that's where I'm trying to live, I'm not trying to control it so much, but I don't know, so if you
And in
think,
some areas, it may not be appropriate.
just as long as it can't be a loop.
Yeah, what's
Couldn't a
that?
developer say
Well,
every?
yeah.
Through
what's
wetlands.
It's not appropriate for me to have to spend the money on building all this stuff, because then I'm not gonna be able to do my project, because I can't budget it
No,
out.
I
So
agree with
so
you.
these sidewalks are no longer appropriate as part of my plan. Will you give me a pass on that?
No.
No, I think,
Well-
no, that's a hard point.
Well,
So I
can't
think
lose
then we
money
need to define appropriate.
trying
We
to
need
build the
find word
project.
appropriate, or
Right.
feasible or appropriate.
Yeah.
Is there a,
We're not talking about that.
Well, there are exceptions listed, right?
Right.
Yeah, but they pay a fine, and then we have to pay the
Right, they have to pay
which
a
is
fine.
bogus.
Payment needed.
What's the developer figure it out?
Give us an easement.
I don't wanna,
Yeah.
Does it make a difference the way I rewrote it?